o'clock. Okay, good morning. Just wait, got a few more people jumping into the room. Give it about 10 more seconds here. Okay, I want to say good morning to everybody. Happy Thursday. Thank you for attending our third session of the virtual preview to the African American Conference on Disabilities. I am Natalie Luna Rose, the Communications and Outreach Manager for the Arizona Center for Disability Law. It is a beautiful yet cold morning in Tucson, so I'm hoping you're having another beautiful day yourselves. Just as a reminder, this is our third session. We have one more session at 1 p.m. And for the time difference, it's 9 o'clock here in Arizona. So if you're on the East Coast, it's 11, it's 10 Central. And if you're on West Coast, you're the same time as us. Just we've had a little bit of confusion with the time zones. And I know that sometimes people have been waiting so patiently. So thank you. This is a precursor to our June conference. We are finally coming back in person after 3 long years of COVID. So that will be June 16th at the Hyatt Regency in downtown Phoenix. So for those who can make it, we really hope to see you there. It'll be another place to extend the conversation we've been having the last 2 days. So I really encourage you, if you can, to attend. And if not, eventually we will have materials and other things available later on in the year. So I would like to thank our sponsors, because we could not do this conference without the support of friends and colleagues and organizations that support the work here at Arizona Center for Disability Law. So I'd like to thank the Arizona Center for African American Resources, ADHS Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs, United Healthcare Community Plan, Valley Toyota Dealers, University of Arizona Center for Excellence in Disabilities, Arizona Developmental Disabilities Planning Council, Northern Arizona Institute for Human Development, Arizona Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, Raising Special Kids, Arizona Community Foundation, Superstitious Springs Lexus, TD Cinex, Arizona State University Disability Studies Program, and Marks the Spot Salon. Again, thank you so much for your support. We really could not do this without your help. Just a few housekeeping items. I'm going to share my screen to go over a few Zoom guidelines. I know a lot of us have been on Zoom for the last couple of years. It seems like we probably feels like we're living on it, but just as a refresher for the next hour and a half. Assume good faith from all attendees. We are all here to learn together. Recognize and respect others' feelings, background, and cultural differences. Please use the chat or raised hand function if you wish to share verbally. If you are speaking, please speak slowly for our ASL and closed captioners. And try to limit yourself to 30 seconds or less. It can be just as courageous to listen as it is to share. And just a little picture at the bottom of the bar for Zoom if you're not sure how to use the raise hand function, or you can always put a question in the chat. We will have certificates of attendance available after today's session. It'll be with a link that we will put in the chat later to take our survey. As soon as you take the survey, you'll be able to access the certificate of attendance as well. So really encourage you to take that survey. Materials for this particular portion of the conference, these 4 sessions will be available on the ACDL website March 1st. So I will send out an email to all of those who have attended to let you know when those materials are ready for for use. And just as a reminder, for those who are not presenting, if you could please have your cameras off, really helps with our ASL interpreters. And make sure that your mics are muted. And what I would like to do is, we have a video from Representative Ruben Gallego. Just a few words to thank everybody for attending the conference. Okay. Okay, just a moment. Technical difficulties.
Hello, I'm Representative Ruben.
Okay, it is working now. Just a moment. I'm sorry about that.
Hello, I'm Representative Ruben Gallego from Arizona's 3rd Congressional District. Thank you to the Arizona Center for Disability Law for inviting me today. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone who joined the virtual seminar in advance of the 12th Annual African American Conference on Disabilities. You are playing an important role in safeguarding civil rights. You're having hard conversations and making a difference in tearing down the barriers the African American and disabilities communities face. And part of having these hard conversations is calling out systematic racism and ableism. It's not right that Black children are unjustly forced into foster care at higher rates than other children. It's not right that students with disabilities and Black students are disciplined at disproportionate rates in schools. And it's not right that Black voters who historically have not had the right to vote must continue to fight voter suppression efforts even today. As public officials, community members, parents, and advocates, we must come together to do everything we can to ensure our children are safe from harm and discrimination. We must fight so our public spaces, including the ballot box, are accessible to everyone. I know many of you look forward to this conference, and I know many of you are ready to fight the good fight. I hope these workshops inspire you to continue to work to empower our communities, especially individuals with disabilities, our Black communities, and people of color, not just during Black History Month, but year-round. I encourage you to sign up to attend the in-person conference on June 16th to keep the conversation going. Thanks again for participating.
Okay, and thank you to Congressman Gallego for his time and on supporting the conference. And again, just as a reminder, today's sessions and yesterday's sessions, the $15 that you paid will help go for scholarships for families to attend our conference in June. So we're really excited. And now I am excited to introduce my colleague, Miss Amanda Glass. She's our managing attorney for our education team. And she and an amazing panel will be leading today's session. So I will hand it off to Amanda.
Great. Thank you so much, Natalie. Good morning, everybody. My name is Amanda Glass. Like Natalie said, I'm the managing attorney of the Arizona Center for Disability Law's education team. I'm really excited to have a panel of some great community leaders and my colleagues here with me today to talk about the intersection of foster care, disability, and special education and race. I'm going to share my screen and then we'll do brief introductions and get right into the meat of it. All right, hopefully everybody can see my screen. So as I said, we're going to be talking today about the educational needs of Arizona's foster youth. I have a really great group of people with me today. I'm going to kind of be emceeing and throwing questions out to each of them to answer, but we are going to try to reserve time at the end today for questions from the audience. If you have questions as we're talking, please feel free to put them in the chat as we go, but we will wait to address them until we get to the end of our discussion. But please feel free to put your questions in as we go. We'll look back at that chat to answer them, or once we get to the end, we can take the time to have people unmute or turn their cameras on and pose questions directly to any of the panelists. So I want to start with some Introductions and housekeeping. So first, I do need to say that the purpose of the training is to provide general information. It's not intended to be a substitute for legal advice. So if you are looking for specific tailored information about a situation you or a child in your life is facing, this is probably not the right venue for it. We would definitely encourage you to seek out individualized advocacy or legal advice. Here, we're really looking to have more of a general conversation about the systems that exist and concerns and hopes we have for addressing those, but not really individual situations or seeking out advice in individual circumstances. We are going to try to reserve some time at the end, like I said, for audience Q&A. So please, if you have questions, like I said, throw them in the chat or hold them till the end. And once we get to the end, you can type those questions in the chat box, or do go ahead and raise your hand and request to be unmuted and turn your camera on. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it over to each of my panelists and ask them to do a brief introduction of themselves before we get into the questions. So Czarina is an employee of the Department of Child Safety. I want to ask if you'd be willing to unmute yourself and kind of give a brief introduction to who you are and what agency you work for and your role in working on education issues for students in foster care.
Good morning, everybody. As Amanda said, my name is Czarina Valadez. I'm with the Department of Child Safety currently. I've been with the department going on about 8 years now. It feels much longer because I interned for 2 years, and I also have been on the receiving side of services. That's actually what brought me to social work. My family had endured, my sister was addicted to drugs, and so we adopted my niece and nephew. So that's kind of what introduced me to my line of work. And so I went full force with getting my bachelor's in family studies and then my master's in social work. And I have happily lived here at the department since, and I absolutely love my job. I primarily did investigations, and those were for criminal conduct cases. And now in my current role, I hope to, my goal is to always just try to close the gap between administration and policy and the field. And so one of the things that I do is I am the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA for short, Child Welfare Liaison for Cochise, Pima, Santa Cruz, and Yuma counties, which is our South region. And so my goal in that role, I do a lot of different things, but in that role specifically, I really hope to advocate for the foster youth and to ensure that they're not moving from school to school every time that they have a change in their living arrangement, and truly finding out what's in their best interest and what school should they be attending to not only have school stability, but to graduate and to become successful citizens and career readiness and all of the things that our youth that are not in the child welfare system experience. So my passion is really just ensuring that all of our foster youth are afforded the same opportunities despite the trauma that they've experienced and endured in their lives, not only in their home, but the trauma that's associated with being in foster care and being away from their family. So that's me in a nutshell, and I am happy to be here today and truly honored to be able to talk to you guys about our kids and how we can best serve them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Czarina. Really appreciate it. Next, Joey Taylor from the Arizona Department of Education. Joey, would you be willing to introduce yourself?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here this morning. My name is Joey Taylor. I'm with the Arizona Department of Education. My kind of role there is the foster care education coordinator. So there's some federal education legislation that kind of dictates that the state educational agency, which is the Arizona Department of Education, designates someone to implement specific foster care school stability assurances. And so we'll talk a lot about that probably throughout the training today. But that's kind of my role is for the state of Arizona to provide that oversight and just make sure that schools and everyone is supporting our youth in foster care. So thank you so much for letting me be here today.
Great. Thank you, Joey. Appreciate it. All right. I'll do a brief introduction of myself. My name is Amanda Glass. I am the managing attorney for the education team at the Arizona Center for Disability Law. I started out here at the center as an Equal Justice Works fellow, and those fellowships require the new attorney to kind of pitch an idea for a very specific legal project. And so my project was specifically looking at at improving access to special education and mental health services for Arizona's kiddos who had been impacted by foster care. So that is sort of how my legal career started out, with a focus on disability and foster care. And I've kind of continued to have a bit of a bias toward those students, that population, in my work, in trying to particularly serve kids who are impacted by the dependency system here in Arizona, especially those who have disabilities and may benefit from or need special education in order to access their learning at school. So I will kind of speak from that perspective of a legal advocate on behalf of students with disabilities. Right. And then Ashley Dickerson from Foster Ed, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Ashley Dickerson. My pronouns are she and her. I currently serve as the Senior Program Manager for Foster Ed Arizona. We are a statewide agency that provides educational support and advocacy for youth experiencing foster care. And I started my career with Foster Ed in 2017. And prior to that, I was an educator. And so I come to this work with the both lived experience and also the advocacy support as well. So, and we're happy to be here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashley. All right. And Jenny Hedges, who will be representing the foster adoptive parent perspective today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Hedges. I use she, her pronouns. As Amanda mentioned, I am an adoptive parent. My wife and I were foster parents for many years, also kinship providers as well. We have 3 children. All of our children have experienced foster care and adoption. Their journeys have been very different and continue to be very different. And our youngest son does benefit from special education services. He is autistic and wonderful and so special. And our other 2 children are so extraordinary, and they've all experienced different things related to foster care and adoption, and their experiences navigating education have been really unique too. I also have the privilege of working with Ashley at Foster Ed, and I'm super excited to be here with you all. So thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to the panelists. You're all amazing. I'm so grateful that you were able to take time this morning to join us and have this conversation. It's really a dynamite panel of people here. These are the experts on this issue. So I'm really excited to have you all here to talk through some of these questions and hopefully, share some new information with some audience members and answer some questions that our audience may have. So kind of jumping into the content, I wanted to kind of let, well, Czarina, if you're interested in speaking on this, you can, but I took some of the data that you'd shared with me just to kind of give a very basic background on the prevalence of this issue. So this was data that DCS, it's public data that DCS put out specifically, and the link is at the bottom of the slide, which will be made available to the audience, as Natalie said, at a later date. But you can actually look at a lot of disaggregated data from DCS about different demographics, different outcomes, different types of out-of-home care placements. But the info that I pulled and put into this slide here was really intended to kind of show the disparity when it comes to race in foster care. So this is in Arizona in Q4 of 2020. I'm assuming DCS got this just based on the census, that overall only 4% of Arizona's children are African-American, but 16% of the children in Arizona's foster care system are African-American. So you can see right there, it's a huge discrepancy. Certainly kids of color and especially African-American kids are being disproportionately impacted by foster care. and not just in-home dependencies, but this is specifically out-of-home foster care. So they're being removed from their home and placed either in a foster family setting or potentially in a congregate care or group home type of setting. So you can really see the discrepancy there. And I don't know, Czarina, if you wanted to add anything to that. Okay. And then I also pulled some data. I actually pulled this data from the Department of Ed's data set for October 1st of 2021, so a slightly later set. But you can see here there's also a discrepancy between the overall population of African-American children in Arizona versus the population of African-American children who are receiving special education services in Arizona. Not quite as big a discrepancy as the foster care system, but nevertheless, there are a disproportionate number of students who are African-American who are identified as having a disability and receiving special education services in Arizona. So this is just kind of to lay the baseline of like, why are we talking about this? Why at the African-American Conference on Disability are we talking about foster care? And it's because our African-American youth are being disproportionately impacted by both foster care and special education. And so that makes the issues we're going to talk about today particularly relevant to that population and the individuals that this conference is really targeted at serving. So with that background, I want to start by asking, what are some of the challenges that are faced by students with disabilities in foster care? And I'm hoping that Ashley, if you would be willing to kind of start off the conversation with what we know from foster ed and any data or resources you'd like to share about the challenges that students with disabilities in foster care are facing.
Sure. So I'll share a little bit more, and then I believe resources will be shared out after. So you might want to flag this to follow up if you're interested in learning more. So we just recently completed a report, an evaluation that focused on Arizona students in foster care from the school years 2018 to 2019. And then 2020 to 21. So of course, that's the pandemic, right? So our data might look a little different because of that, but it's also really telling. So some of the challenges that we see for our students that also have disabilities is that students in foster care are likely to be identified as having a disability compared to their peers. And that's simply due to the trauma and the experiences that have led them to being involved in the child welfare system. The other thing that we see as a challenge is that schools are often not informed that one, the student is in foster care, or two, they're unaware if the guardian or parent still has educational rights or has been limited by the state. And so that causes delays around evaluations and being able to get those supports in place for students that have disabilities and need it. The other thing that gets really tricky, that's a challenge for us, is that it becomes incredibly difficult when we are in a process of trying to amend an IEP or update an IEP. And because of their experience in foster care and their high mobility, you can imagine, going from school to school, which shouldn't happen. And we'll talk about some of those protections in place to help alleviate a lot of those moves and sometimes maybe unnecessary moves. The issue that we run into is that they're constantly moving. And so we can make progress at one school and then they disrupt and have to go to another school. And then of course, some of our schools say, like, we need to wait like 12 days or we need to wait 30 days to collect data. So there's a lot of barriers that comes with the high mobility of our students in foster care. And then what we also saw in this latest report was the effect of the pandemic. So we saw a lot of our students, like all of us, were trying to figure out how does education work in a pandemic. So with that being said, we saw a pretty significant delay in evaluations. Some districts and some schools are still trying to catch up from their kind of policies around special education and evaluations for our students. And then we also saw an increase in comp ed services. So that's because there were a lack or no services during the pandemic for young people that are in foster care and have disabilities. We're now seeing that schools are still trying to make up for that time. So it's a very unique situation that adds a lot of layers because of their experience in foster care and their disabilities.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the insight. And like Ashley said, that report is among the materials that are going to be made available later on to all participants. So you will receive that document as well, so you can review it in more detail. Jenny, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about your experience as a foster parent and some specific challenges that you've seen for your kiddos.
Sure. So one thing that I will mention is that one of the things that we do see is that children who have been identified as having a disability in schools are more likely to also receive disciplinary actions. And when we're talking about young people who are in foster care, we have to remember that sometimes those disciplinary actions are really layered and complex because they can lead to placement disruption too. So we do see a lot of foster parents who will sometimes feel like they're unable to care for a child who maybe is getting in trouble at school more often or being called with poor reports from school. And so it could lead to placement instability, which also leads to a lot of anxiety for young people who don't know what the consequences will be at home for their actions at school. And I will say that as one of the moms to my children, we feel this anxiety at home in a different way. Obviously not placement instability, but our youngest son, who is autistic, has an IEP, and has a lot of services in place, we've noticed that sometimes we feel as if he's under more of a microscope than other students. He is a male person of color. His disability sometimes presents in a way that he might not recognize someone else's personal space or boundaries because he's so overwhelmed or overstimulated that sometimes it's just not something that he can recognize in that moment. And sometimes we feel as though the reports that we receive from home are very targeted, and we're worried sometimes about how much of a microscope he's under and to what standard he's being held for his actions when he's only 6 years old. And we do see and hear other families and friends that have children his age that maybe aren't receiving the same notes home, but are perhaps responding in similar ways at school. And so those are some things that we've noticed as parents, but also as foster parents and in the foster care community, that students with disabilities are facing those types of challenges where sometimes they're under more of a microscope and have heightened anxiety about things like placement instability, when a child who's 6, 7, 8 years old, or even 11, 12, 17 shouldn't have to worry about their behavior at school impacting whether or not they have the same home to go back to after school.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jenny, for sharing that. I want to speak a little bit about some of the legal issues that exist when it comes to kids with disabilities who are in foster care. So Ashley touched on these, but one of the issues when it comes to special education, there are a few laws that govern it, and those laws have very specific definitions of parent. So who is the child's parent for purposes of special education? And that's important because the parent is the one who needs to do things like consent to the school conducting an evaluation or be invited to IEP meetings where determinations are made about services and placement and things like that for the child. But when you have a child in foster care, it can be a little confusing to determine who the parent is under the statutory definition. So IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is where IEPs come from, has a specific definition of parent, but it lists out a number of different types of individuals who could be considered the parent, and that includes biological or adoptive parent. It also lists out foster parent, what would be considered a kinship placement, like a relative with whom the child is living, a guardian, or something called a surrogate parent. So sometimes, a kiddo only has one of those, and then it's really clear, like, okay, there's no bio or adoptive parent, but the child is living in a foster home. So very clearly the foster parent is the parent for purposes of special education. But more often it's a little unclear. Maybe this child is living in a foster home with a foster parent, but they do still have biological parents who are in the process of trying to get them back. There's an ongoing dependency, or perhaps they're not going to get them back, but they haven't yet been legally terminated. Their rights still exist. So in that case, which adult is going to serve as the parent? And then we have other situations where a student is in the custody of the Department of Child Safety, but they don't have anyone on that list. They aren't in a foster home. They're in a congregate care setting, like a group home. Their biological parents' rights have been severed, or they don't have biological parents anymore. There's no guardian, there's no kinship placement. So in that case, if a child is living in a group home, who should be serving as their parent for purposes of special education? And that's when this concept of a surrogate parent comes into play. And that's a volunteer who's gone through some training and should be appointed by the state education agency in partnership with the local education agency to serve as that parent for the student. But unfortunately, that often goes unidentified. As Ashley mentioned and Jenny mentioned, there is a lot of disruption. So kids can be moving around a lot, and it can just take a long time to even realize a child needs a surrogate parent. And in the meantime, they're missing out on learning and services that they really need to be successful. So that's one challenge, is figuring out who the IDEA or special education parent is. Another legal issue, again, that was mentioned by Ashley, is that schools may take a while to identify these students. And with the unfortunate high rate of school instability, which we will talk about how all of our organizations are trying to address that. But the reality is that kids in care do move around a lot right now. And when schools are taking a long time to identify them, again, they can continue to fall through the cracks. Maybe an evaluation starts at one school, but then they disrupt. And then the process has to start over again. So just being aware of the legal obligations that schools have, in particular to highly mobile students, like students in foster care, when it comes to identification, can be helpful in advocating for these students to be identified quickly and get services in place in a timely manner. Okay, so now we've kind of talked about a number of the challenges that kids in care face. Let's move on to something more hopeful. So what laws and policies do exist to try to address some of these problems? And I'm going to pass it to Joey first. Joey, could you provide some background on some of the laws and policies that exist to address these problems, and information about what schools and the child welfare agencies should be doing to try to help address this?
Yeah, absolutely. And so definitely, as was mentioned, one kind of big key challenge across the spectrum for any youth in foster care, but especially if they have any kind of qualifying disabilities that would make them eligible for special education, is the fact that sometimes they have school mobility issues, where they are changing schools at such a rapid rate that schools cannot even address or put into practice things that they should for those kids. And so something that happened in about 2015 was they reauthorized the Elementary Secondary Education Act, and now it's called the Every Student Succeeds Act. This was in December 10th, 2015. And so what the Every Student Succeeds Act, or more casually known as ESSA, really is it's our big picture federal education legislation for our country. Like, all of our title programs are within this, Every Student Succeeds Act law. And for the first time really in like any kind of federal education legislation, they address youth that are in foster care. And so a couple of the key, kind of provisions and assurances that are in place for kids in foster care is, one, like I said, you get me, yay. So I am, the law does specifically state that our state's education agency, Arizona Department of Education, and this is across the whole country, so every state, but we have to have a specific person who will oversee the implementation of the foster care school stability assurances. And so another kind of key thing this law did is it kind of made, kids in foster care their own demographic within the school system. And so before this law passed, before, December 10th, 2015, kids in foster care were often kind of categorized with our McKinney-Vento youth or our homeless children and youth. And so what ESSA did is it actually removed the words awaiting foster care placements from the definition from what it meant to be homeless. And so it really did make foster care as its own demographic. And the law even does, kind of mandate the state to report out on data on our youth in foster care. So things like student achievement and graduation rate. And then there's even some, more data requirements to come from the U.S. Department of Ed as far as just identifying youth that are in foster care. So now that we have this kind of demographic in the school system of kids that are in foster care, here are some of the basically assurances that are in place for these youth, according to this federal law. And this federal law really does kind of borrow from the Fostering Connections Act from 2006, from 2008. And so it is pretty cool to see that the Fostering Connections Act, which is a Social Security law and something that like child welfare would need to adhere to, really does promote this idea of school stability. And so what the law says in essence is that children that are in foster care actually have a right to still stay at the school they're at before any kind of foster care living changes. And so they call that school the school of origin. So if a kid is in foster care, they actually have the right to stay at their school of origin, which is that school that they were attending before either entering foster care, or if they're already in foster care, the school they're attending before any kind of placement changes. And so that's a really, really, really key kind of first point, is that the law really is prioritizing that if a youth is in foster care, our kind of first choice and our presumption is that they should really, stay at that school of origin. But given the nature of foster care and how every single situation is so unique, the law does state that if it's not in the best interest of the child to stay at that school of origin, okay. If it's not in the best interest to stay at the school of origin, let's have that kid be immediately enrolled into that new school. That way they're not seeing any kind of gaps or lapses in education while all the adults are doing paperwork, right? And so again, want to really focus and make sure I say it so many times. Kids are in foster care. They should stay in their school of origin, right? But if it's not in their best interest to stay in their school of origin, okay, let's have that kid go to a new school. And so ideally and kind of, theoretically and protected by law even, if a kid is in foster care, they could actually maintain school stability throughout their foster care journey. And so this law really does have a lot of collaboration that's needed. So the collaboration, kind of primarily takes place between, the schools at the local level, myself at the state level, kind of, helping, their compliance and making sure they have everything they need. And then also with the child welfare agency. So there are kind of, basically three types of child welfare agencies in Arizona. We have our state child welfare agency, DCS. We got tribal kind of foster care, where each individual, indigenous sovereign nation has their own tribal social services and may, they're going to act as a child welfare agency for those youth. And then we have local child welfare agencies. So really a lot of collaboration comes together on this. And so, and then further down in the law as well, if we have our kids in foster care and they're going to stay in their school of origin, there's actually, transportation that should be provided to that youth for the entire time they're in foster care, even if that expands multiple school years. And so it kind of gives them the right to stay in the school of origin. And then if they are going to stay in school of origin, it really is the school district of that school of origin or that charter, and also the child welfare agency collaborating and working together to make sure that that kid can actually get to and from. And so there's a whole lot of more nuances from that, but I think I'll pass it back to Amanda to see if we want to expand on this a little further.
Yeah, thank you so much, Joey. I actually want to ask Czarina, as a representative of the primary state child welfare agency here in Arizona, the Department of Child Safety, Is there anything you'd like to add to what Joey explained around ESSA, school stability, or the child welfare agency's role?
So I think Joey did, by the way, a phenomenal job of explaining all of that as, you know, as easy as possible. I feel like there's so much that goes into it, but you did a really good job, Joey. So I don't really have much to add. I think the next question that we're going into asks more about our specific agency. So that's kind of where I feel like it's segueing into. And so for the next question, I can speak much more directly about how the department has implemented these laws and policies, or the, you know, how we're making sure that we're following ESSA and what we've done to do so.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to speak really briefly about some other tools in the toolbox, and then we'll move into that question of what is our agency's role and what are we doing. So the issue, you know, of school stability, highly mobile kids who are going to multiple schools in a year. I know I've done presentations with Joey before where he's asked, he'll always poll the audience, you know, how many schools have you attended over your entire K-12 career? And most people, it's like 2, 3, 5 at the most. He will tell a story of a student in foster care who had gone to 50 schools over the course, and she wasn't done. She was in high school still. So it's just, it boggles the mind to think about how many moves some of our kids in care have to go through, and just the, you know, they're already have so much instability in their lives, in their home lives, potentially going from place to place in terms of their residence, but then to also have to completely up and move schools. You have new classes, new teachers, new friends, new extracurriculars, a new route, you know, a new bell schedule to figure out. There's just so much that you have to deal with constantly. And I can't imagine, you know, the trauma of being bombarded with all that newness. So that is why like ESSA is so important, and why all of us are trying really hard to ensure that kids get to stay in their school of origin as long as it's in their best interest, to try to lessen that instability and reduce that anxiety and overwhelm as much as possible. So one way that we try to do that and is, you know, we're trying to keep them stable in one school, but we also want to try to identify them as quickly as possible if they are a student with a disability who is going to need special education services. So when a kiddo is referred for special education evaluation and testing, the federal law and Arizona law reflects that the school has 60 calendar days from the time they decide to evaluate to actually do all the testing and then make a determination about whether that child is eligible. So 60 calendar days, that's really just 2 months. It's not that big a deal. It's usually less than a semester. But if you're a kid in care, that's a really long time to hope that you're going to be able to stay in the same school. So what and then on top of that, sometimes we'll have schools, like Ashley was saying, kind of say, well, before we actually agree to move forward with an evaluation, let's try some informal intervention. Let's wait and collect some data from teachers. Let's add, you know, another 15 or 30 or 180 days to that already long 60-day timeline. So all of a sudden, you're kind of asking a kid to be in one school for almost a whole school year before they can hope to be identified. And like I said, in the meantime, they're losing out on access to services that they might really need in order to benefit from their education. And then, of course, they move to a new school and that whole timeline restarts, right? The new school wants that additional time to gather data. So the federal government has recognized that this is a problem, not just for kids in foster care, but for a larger population that they generally call highly mobile students, which would include kids in foster care, but also homeless students and probably like military students as well. So kids who are moving around a lot. And so there's guidance. It's not statute or regulation, but there is guidance from the U.S. Department of Education asking that schools not delay at all in identifying these highly mobile students when it comes to identifying them as having a disability. So essentially, you know, if a parent, and again, it's important to know who the parent is for our kids in care, but if a parent requests an evaluation, schools really should just be moving right into that evaluation process, saying, you know, yes, we're going to evaluate, and then start that 60 days. And if possible, finish much earlier than the 60 days. It doesn't really require 60 days of testing. That's sort of just the time frame in which legally a school can get the testing done. But typically, testing itself will only take a few days, a few couple hour long sessions with a psychologist or a therapist, or, getting some evaluations filled out by parents and the school and teachers, and then having that meeting to determine, is this child eligible? Because if they are, then we want to get those services in place, create an IEP that will then follow that student. Even if they disrupt schools and end up in a different placement, that IEP will follow them, and those services should continue from school to school. So the feds have said that school districts should not be utilizing what they call response to intervention, or RTI, or now a lot of schools call it a multi-tiered system of support. So these schools will have these systems, which are good. They're good systems to have. The idea is, let's try some informal intervention. If a kiddo is struggling with, reading, before we just say, oh, they probably have a learning disability, let's test them. Let's first try and pull them out, give them some, tiered interventions, and kind of work through that and see if we can meet their needs without labeling them as having a disability if they don't. But again, for our kids in care, they don't really have time to move through a multi-tiered system of support. They need to be tested right away, because otherwise it's just going to, snowball into a bigger and bigger issue where they're not getting served. So again, the feds say for highly mobile students, do not use response to intervention or multi-tiered systems of support as an excuse to delay evaluating. Essentially, you can still obviously use those supports for kids, but if someone has requested an evaluation, don't say, no, we can't evaluate yet. We have to wait and try all these other things first. Like, once an evaluation is requested because someone has good reason to suspect a disability, please move forward and efficiently and effectively evaluate that child, so that if they are a student with a disability, they get identified in a timely fashion. And then the other thing I wanted to bring up is this problem of identifying the special education parent. It's a problem in every state. IDEA is a federal law, but some states individually have taken steps to try to help address it by either immediately upon a student entering care, identifying who that parent is going to be. Some states like California actually delegate that responsibility to an officer of the court. So it goes away from both the bio parent and any foster parent. And there's someone who's actually trained to play that role and be the student's educational parent while they're in care. Arizona had nothing like that. It was really kind of just based on the federal law and sort of an individualized inquiry. Sometimes we figured it out, sometimes we didn't. Sometimes, the specialists from the Department of Child Safety thought they were the parent, and sometimes the group home thought they were the parent, and sometimes the foster parent thought they were the parent, even though bio parents were still around. So there's just a lot of confusion, which can lead to conflict among the adults, which is not to the benefit of the child. So we kind of have tried recently to come up with a way to address this. And just actually last year, we asked that the juvenile courts, which are the courts that adjudicate the dependency proceeding. So this is the judge that you're going to go before when a child is being removed, when they're determining if the child is dependent on the Department of Child Safety, and also the same judges that are deciding if a parent's rights need to be terminated or severed. That court system now has a new rule that specifically requires the judge to identify who the special education parent is as to that child at each hearing that they're having for the child. And the idea being that, who that parent is might change over the course of a dependency case. At the beginning, it might be the bio parent, even if the kid is in out-of-home care, the bio parent might retain that right, might be the one who should be invited to IEP meetings, and especially in the case plan is reunification, and the parents maybe just going through some treatment or counseling. We want them to remain super involved in the child's education and be advocating for the child to get the services they need and retain the right to make those big decisions for their child. But over the course of a case, maybe the case plan changes or the parent's rights get severed. And so we just want it to be super clear for the schools, for the advocates, for the child. Who is my special ed parent? I don't really know. It could be 3 different people right now. So if I have an order from a judge making it super clear, then everybody can be on the same page and we don't have to waste time arguing about that. And at least we know who the educational rights holder is for that child. So that new rule just went into effect last summer. We are seeing it roll out very slowly, but we're hoping that the courts will kind of get on it and really start to do that at every hearing, put into their minute entry who the IDEA parent is so that we're all on the same page going forward. And hopefully that'll address some of the confusion around that issue of who should be making decisions with regard to the student's special education. So having talked about that significantly, we're going to move on to the next question, which is what role do you and your agencies play in enacting or enforcing these laws and policies? So I'm going to start again with Joey and ask Joey, can you speak a little bit about the Arizona Department of Ed as our state's education agency and its role in enforcing ESSA and any other laws or policies you want to speak about?
Yeah, sure. And so, yeah, definitely the way it kind of goes is that the Arizona Department of Education, like I said, they are our state's educational agency. And so they, the state educational agency oversees what are called local educational agencies. And so those are going to be your public school districts and your public charters. And so, you know, and then often there are, lots of federal laws and federal grants and things like that. And so often the state educational agency has to kind of administer any kind of grant funds like that or oversee how those grant funds are used. And so part of this oversight does require, basic kind of compliance and fidelity to any of these federal laws. And so the school stability assurances that I referenced earlier are under Title I, Part A. And so there is that's kind of where some of the compliance and some of the enforcement can really come into play. And so everything about school stability and keeping kids in school of origin, that is a state level assurance. And so basically what that means is that any child in foster care attending any public school, whether it's district or charter, they have those rights that I mentioned about staying in school of origin, and and if it's not in their best interest to stay in school of origin, to be immediately enrolled into the new school. And so that's kind of how that goes. And then as far as some of the compliance on some of the more like the transportation piece, for example, that's actually something that can really be enforced through Title I. And so Title I is usually a pretty kind of large chunk of money that a school district or charter would receive. And so there are a lot of interventions in place for if the school isn't maintaining school stability or isn't ensuring any kind of transportation to the school of origin in collaboration with the child welfare agency. There are many interventions that will happen to kind of make sure that does happen, but if none of those interventions are heeded, it could end up actually putting a hold on that Title I money, which obviously would significantly impact the district. And so they often do not let it get that far. Just like I think most of us, if you start, kind of touching my wallet, I kind of listen real close and try to make sure I'm doing what I need to do. So similarly in schools as well. And so another kind of like enacting or enforcing part of this is that the law really does kind of recommend that each each of those public school districts and charters have a specific point of contact for the child welfare agency to see that these school stability assurances actually happen. And so that has happened and taken place. And so we're kind of it's with turnover and staff changing their roles and things like that, it can be sometimes a little bit difficult to exactly nail down the person who is the foster care point of contact at a specific school district charter. But we do have that posted on the Arizona Department of Education foster care website. So I'll put that in the chat in just a second here so you all can reference that. And so that is another key thing too. So that way, again, there's a lot of people on this exact training. So depending on where you kind of find yourself, you may need to reach out to those points of contact and say, hey, I'm supporting this youth in foster care. Just want to make sure, they're getting everything they need. They're maintaining school stability, things like that. There are additionally, some other kind of key, provisions that a youth in foster care would receive just based on their status as being in foster care. One major one is that they would be categorically eligible for free and reduced lunch. And so again, that's something else you can definitely be advocating for, is that if they are in foster care, the caregiver or anything would not have to fill out a bunch of paperwork on that. Their status should give them that exact, you know, that provision really. And so and then another thing too, especially at like some of the you know, secondary level in high school age youth in foster care, there are a lot of supports for them as far as helping address, you know, specific school, you know, kind of fees, especially around post-secondary, so SAT, or excuse me, SAT, ACT. I get a little jumbled there sometimes. I apologize. But for those, there are waivers for our youth in foster care. So those are some of the things we do. And so another key component is I provide a lot of training and technical assistance, especially, you know, again, for our school districts and charters, given that I kind of, you know, oversee that. And so that is something we do a lot. And we did put out a really cool you know, document recently called Students in Foster Care Receiving Special Education, and that was a joint effort between myself and ADE's Exceptional Student Services team. And so again, it's not, you know, perfect and it's not exhaustive, but it does hit a lot of the key issues that do arise, and has lots of citations to other laws and policies. So I think I'll just kind of cap it there and let you toss it to the next person, but I'll put some of those links in the chat that I referenced.
Great, thank you so much. Okay. I'd like to turn it over to Czarina now to talk about, so we heard from Joey about the role that the Department of Ed plays in enforcing these laws. Czarina, can you talk a little bit about the role of DCS as our state's primary child welfare agency, and what you do specifically as well at DCS around enforcing these laws?
Yes, so I'll like you said, start with just kind of as an agency, the things that we've adopted and done since ESSA has come into place, and then talk a little bit more specifically about my role. So when ESSA came out and we needed to make changes to adhere to ESSA, basically, there's several different things that we did. So the first is that we created points of contact. So we have a state point of contact, as well as a regional point of contact. So our state, thankfully, not every state works like this. If I'm not sure, you know, I know that there's different states here and people invited, but the way that Arizona is we're a state based foster care system and child welfare system. And so some other states are county based. And so we are state based. And so the beauty of that is that this is something that we put together for the whole state. And so it's not just Pima County or Maricopa County or anything like that. The whole state has to adhere to this. So we have our state level point of contact, and then we have our regional points of contact. So our state is divided in regions. And so we have 5 different regions. And the region that I serve is South region, which is Pima County, Cochise County, Santa Cruz, and Yuma County. Then we have Northwest, Northeast region, and then we have Maricopa West and Maricopa East region. So each region has a point of contact. So it's myself and my 4 other peers that we're basically the liaison for our kids and our staff, really support to our staff, and we work together with the schools. And so I'll get into more specifics in a bit on that. But in addition to creating these points of contact, there was a lot of revisions to our policies and to our procedures. And so we had to update our TDM, our team decision-making policy, as well as our education policy, to make sure that we're including, that we are looking at the child's best interest anytime that we're changing their living arrangements. We are making sure that we are coming to the table and figuring out what's best for their education at that moment. Is it best for them to stay at their school of origin, or is it best for them to go to a new school? And we really have to justify either way, what are we doing and why? And so we have created this best interest and determination and transportation plan and form. We had extensive stakeholder input to be able to create that form. We actually just recently updated it. So that's another beautiful thing with it, is that it's not something that is in stone forever. We're constantly reevaluating and seeing, if we need to adopt it. And so in these most recent changes, the greatest change, I think, was that instead of having just kind of check boxes for the old school or the school of origin or a potential new school, there's actually narrative spaces that the staff can document why we're in support of either one, and it's not just a checkbox. And so that form does get disclosed to the courts, the juvenile courts, as well as the parents and the schools and the whole team essentially. And so it's really important that we're not just checking boxes and that we really are able to articulate why, this child should stay at their school or go to a new school, given, their current circumstances and situation. So we have our points of contact, we have our best interest determination form, we've updated our policies so that all of that is matching. We did a lot of training initially, and most recently we do here in South Region, we have quarterly trainings for our staff. It is mandatory for all of our staff to attend. And then we have, in addition to that, we have quarterly meetings with the schools. So we've created a collaboration meeting that we have with all of the schools. Currently, it's really focused on Pima County, but the goal is to have this type of collaboration and quarterly meetings with all of the LEA points of contact quarterly in each county. So that's the goal. We're working on that. We're not there yet. In addition to those meetings, we have updated our administrative policies on travel reimbursements. And so that includes reimbursement to kinship caregivers. So now we can allow for kinship caregivers to be reimbursed mileage for transporting the children to and from school. They have to be unlicensed, but it's still something that we were able to do to try to help and benefit the student, and to not, if it's a financial burden to transport them to their school of origin, we want to be able to help in any way that we can. So we did make that change as well. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else, or just kind of referencing my notes that we have done. We did maintain initially a list of all of the LEA points of contact, but ADE Joey's done a phenomenal job at doing that. And so it didn't make sense for both of us to be doing it. So we started with doing that, but now we have just kind of turned it over and point everyone, our staff at least, to ADE's website to be able to find the LEA points of contact. But we just had our meeting this week, I think it was actually yesterday, and with the LEAs, that collaboration meeting that I was discussing, and in that meeting we were talking about, there's still some schools that don't have LEA points of contact. And so what can we do to network and to get these schools to have, these districts rather, to have their points of contact, especially the larger districts. So we're working on requesting those LEA points of contact so that we can continue to collaborate and communicate and work together to do what's best for these youth. So that's, in general, what the department as an agency has done to satisfy, the ESSA requirements. But so more specifically to my role, I am here to be able to help our staff, whenever we have a child that is, our policy says that whenever they're changing their living arrangement, we should have a best interest determination meeting to determine, the school that they're going to be attending, what's in their best interest. And so I actually encourage our staff to go above policy and to, if we are having any discussion that this child is potentially changing schools or potentially changing homes, then we're having a meeting. And the reason why we go a little bit above that is just because we found in certain situations that maybe the child hasn't moved yet, but they're going to move. And if we know that this child, for example, a foster home can put in a 30 days notice of disruption. And so in 30 days, this child's going to disrupt. Well, we don't want to wait until after they've moved to then try to figure out their school. We want to try to figure out where are they going to be placed, and let's figure out their school so this transition is as seamless as possible. And hopefully they don't have to change schools despite changing homes. And so we've just ran into several situations where maybe the child hasn't moved yet, but they are going to, that we want to make sure that we're prepared and planned for that move, and hopefully keeping the child at their school while doing so. So I work with our staff, I train our staff, but I also just am there to support them. If the issue is complex, sometimes special ed's involved, sometimes there's transportation issues, there's a lot of different things that can kind of create barriers for the child, no matter what the decision is, whether they're staying at their school of origin or going to a new school. That's when I am there to support our staff. So there's times where, I think one of the barriers, and I think another question, I'll probably go into it more, but all to say that whenever there's barriers is when I'll come in and help. And so sometimes it's that, schools aren't enrolling immediately, which ESSA says that they should enroll immediately despite not having, a birth certificate or immunization records or things like that. And so then I'll get involved and I'll help educate the schools on ESSA and that the child should be immediately enrolled. In other situations, they would like us to pursue open enrollment or just denying our youth in general. And so just a lot of collaboration and communication with the LEAs to make sure that we are all following ESSA and that we're affording, these kiddos the rights to remain in their school of origin or attend a new school if that is what the best interest determination meeting determined. So I'll get into more of the challenges in a few questions down the road, but there are a lot of challenges that we face, even though that these laws and policies are in place. There's challenges. And so that's where I can speak more to how I support our staff and truly advocate for the youth when it comes to them, going to the school that's in their best interest. The other thing that I would add to is that we do have we are separate. I think a lot of people don't realize this, but we are separate from tribal social services agencies. So the department serves our youth, but there are nations and tribes that have their own basically equivalent of the Department of Child Safety. They have their own child protective services. And so we are working on getting them on board as well, so that when we have a child that's living on the reservation and is now living in, in the city or vice versa, we can all be on the same page with ESSA, and we can all make sure that we're advocating for the youth. But just as we're trying to get those districts that don't have an LEA point of contact, we're also trying to get the reservations, and the nations and tribes up to speed on ESSA and trying to help that we help in that way, in whatever way we can to get everybody on the same page for truly advocating what's best for the youth and getting them into the school that they need to be in.
Thanks, Czarina. I'm going to really briefly talk about my agency. So the Arizona Center for Disability Law, if you've been to any other conference sessions, you've probably heard a lot about us. We are the protection and advocacy agency for the state. We provide free legal services to people with disabilities, and a large part of the services we provide are around special education. And like I said at the beginning of this panel, I specifically have an interest in kids who have special education needs who are impacted by the foster care system. So our organization, we again provide free legal services to people with disabilities across the state. We do get a lot of calls about special ed issues. And so we may step in either providing resources or referrals when there's an issue relating to special ed and foster care, or we may provide direct legal representation in certain circumstances. And a lot of the work I do is going to IEP meetings, writing demand letters to schools that aren't following the laws appropriately, going to mediations, potentially filing complaints with the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights or the Arizona Department of Education, or even due process complaints that would go before an administrative law judge. but also a lot of trying to collaborate and train. So I work with all these lovely panelists pretty regularly on outreach and training. We may collaborate on specific cases. Czarina and I worked recently on trying to get a kiddo enrolled in school when the school was saying, you know, even though we are clearly the best, this is the best in the best interest of the child for them to attend here, we don't want to serve them. So we figured out a way to get that child enrolled and served. So my office, you know, we're often serving individuals, but we're also trying to work on addressing some systemic issues as well. All right, so just being conscientious of time. I know we still have a lot of content to get through and I want to make sure we touch on everything. So I do question number 5 here is how have these laws and policies made a positive difference in the lives of foster youth? So I want to start with Ashley. I don't know if you have any anecdotal examples or overall examples from your work in foster ed about the way ESSA or some of these other laws have had a positive impact on kids in foster care that you could share.
Yeah, sure. So just for context, foster ed, we are the only agency in the entire state that provides educational advocacy and support in the way that we do. And so we get the honor and privilege of working with young people, their families, and their teams every single day. We've been operating and functioning in Arizona since 2014 and expanded to Maricopa in 2017. And we have a team in Yavapai. So we're a small but mighty team, and we're able to do a lot of really incredible work alongside partners here, Joey, DCS as well. So we have seen a pretty significant shift in the way that schools are understanding ESSA and how implementation can directly impact and improve educational outcomes. So I have one student that comes to mind. Prior to me serving in the program manager role, I was a liaison, is what we call our staff that works directly with students. And I was working with a student in a high school, a local high school, that was, I think that when she had gotten to our school, this was her 9th high school and she was a senior. And she instantly made connections with teachers, with her softball coach, and was on track to graduate until her group home was closing in December. And the new group home that she moved to was in Mesa, and the school that she attended was in downtown Phoenix. And so that commute any given day is like 40-45 minutes. And one thing about youth in foster care is that they're incredibly resilient. And they're able to advocate for their needs when given the space and opportunity to do that. And so our program is youth-centered. We're probably very unique in the sense that we truly center the voices and the experiences of our students. And my role was to support her staying at the high school that she was currently enrolled in and not moving to the school that was closer. And, you know, we do run into some issues where the group home was saying it'd be so much easier because we drop all the kids off there. And that's like, great, that's not a one size fit all. Like we have to make sure that we're making those individual decisions for each student. And so we were able to have a bid, which is the best interest determination meeting. And it was pretty lengthy and it was a lot of kind of back and forth. And what's really great about our program is that we constantly are uplifting the voices of students, and her voice was heard. So she was able to remain at that school. She graduated high school in the top like 10% of her class, and then went on to go to ASU, and still in touch with her pretty often, and she will be a senior at ASU next year. So when ESSA is implemented appropriately every single time, it always will have an improved educational outcomes for the youth that we serve.
That's amazing. That's an awesome story. Thank you so much, Ashley. I appreciate you sharing that. And then I wanted to ask Jenny if you have any personal stories about your family and the impact that ESSA and the school stability provisions or IDEA issues may have had for you and your kiddos.
Sure. Yeah. So really briefly, I'll just mention that my daughter, she was 15 when we first met her, and it was right like literally the weekend before everything shut down with the pandemic, and we met her in person just one time before, unfortunately, like she was faced with the decision of whether or not she wanted to move from the current foster home she was in into our home. And that was only because she was in a place where she did not want to be adopted. And the home that she was in was not supportive of that decision of hers, and was kind of pushing her in the direction of either allowing them to adopt her or not staying. And so when we did meet her, we were strangers, and I expected that maybe she would have a lot of questions about who we were as a family. But really the only question she asked us was whether or not she would be able to stay in her school. And she was going to be a sophomore in high school. And we were really, taken aback that she was so worried, not taken aback, but it was just telling that she was so worried about that specifically. And I wasn't really surprised because of the work that I do with Ashley at Foster Ed, and that so many of our students do ask that question, but also just coming from the perspective of meeting her as a potential placement. It was a different feeling to be asked that by someone who we were going to hopefully be caring for as, her parents. And so thankfully we were able to say, yes, you can stay in your school. And she did. And she's a senior now. She's graduating in a couple of months from that same high school. And even though she rolls her eyes like every single day about having to go to school and how boring it is and all of those typical teenage things, I'm really grateful that that wasn't a change in her life at the same time as everything else in her world was changing. And I do think that it was really, really positive for her to be able to stay in her school of origin. And I will say that the school did not push back at all, which is really telling in our just kind of shift in schools and districts being mindful of ESSA. And so there was no battle there, at least for her, in terms of registering year after year to stay in her school of origin, despite it being completely outside of our resident district. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Jenny, for sharing that.
Amanda, can I share one quick story?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say we're at like 10:15 and I want to save a little time for questions, but I do want to kind of go down the list. And I know we had some other questions on our slides that I'll zoom through, but essentially the rest of the questions were like, what are some ongoing issues and how are we trying to address them ourselves or through our agencies? So I'm going to give each of our panelists another option to share anything else that kind of fits within that or that you want to share anecdotally. And then hopefully we'll have just a couple minutes at the end to address any questions. So please, if you are in the audience and have a question, start putting it in the chat so we can try to get to it at the end. But yes, Czarina, if you want to start, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just want to, I think it's kind of a story, but it'll, an anecdotal story, but I think it'll address two of the questions. So one is that one of the barriers that we face in this is just the making it all work, right? It's like we all have to collaborate, we all have to communicate, but then how do we do it? Who does it? And how do we make that happen? And so one of the biggest challenges that we do face is transportation. And so in the anecdotal story that I wanted to share for this foster youth, like because we have ESSA and because the department changed our policies in allowing kinship to be reimbursed mileage, we actually had a caregiver that we were able to give them a check for $6,636 so that they could continue transporting the placement was the grandmother of their 3 grandchildren to school. And this was during the pandemic. And so it was actually really challenging because it was a time where nobody was transporting to school. But this particular grandmother's home did not have internet. And so she had to drive to the YMCA to be able to get the kids to school every day so that they could basically just have internet access. It is a thing. If you didn't know, there is still like dead spots for internet. And so we tried every company and every hotspot and there just was no internet. So she had to drive. And it ended up just becoming, difficult and wear and tear on her vehicle. And financially, she couldn't afford tires and things like that. So it was a beautiful story that we were able to give her mileage reimbursement for all of that transportation, and that $6,636 gave her more than just some tires. So we want our kids, some of the things that we battle and we face is that we want our kids to stay with family. We want siblings to stay together, but we also want them to stay at their school. Like there's so many priorities that we're juggling. And this is a situation that if we can just help you financially through this, then we can preserve these children being with their siblings and with their grandmother and at their school, right? And so it's just really awesome that we were able to do that. And it really wasn't difficult at all. But I think that's just the beauty that, you know, that came of that, and really just trying to face these transportation barriers and cost share opportunities, or, you know, utilize, we're all just coming to the table and figuring out how can we get this child to the school that we've decided is in their best interest. So for time's sake, that's all I'll share.
Sorry, thank you so much, Czarina. Appreciate it. Okay, I'm gonna hop to Joey. Any additional thoughts, final thoughts about ongoing issues and steps you're taking to address them, or any anecdotes you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I again, like I have more than 10 minutes worth of things to say, but as always, no, I'll be so fast. So, one kind of big thing that can happen sometimes is, schools and even sometimes child welfare staff, and me too, of course, right? We want like one clear, like 1, 2, 3, this is what you do. Like they want to be uniform, they want to be every single time. But with foster care and each youth's individual circumstances, we have some, you know, guiding lights and some, we have some uniformity, but it's not going to be exactly the same every single time. And I know school districts struggle with that, because I think Child Welfare Agency does as well, where people sometimes are looking for, like, you know, give me the bare minimum thing I have to do, A, B, C, D, and I will do that, right? Almost like too much on like the letter of the law as opposed to like the spirit of the law of school stability. And so that is a huge challenge. And then additionally, I think turnover from both entities, meaning the school districts and charters, and also Child Welfare Agency, it just, sometimes there's inconsistency. So depending on which school you're working with or which Child Welfare Agency staff you're working with, sometimes you get a different experience, and that is just it's a challenge and a struggle. And I know I can speak for everybody on this call that we are trying so hard to get the correct information in the hands of people that need it. And I mean, Czarina goes so above and beyond, and she'll even step outside of her region and help other parts of the state. I mean, we are all really trying to get every school on the same page and every, you know, kind of Child Welfare Agency person on the same page. But just whenever that's not happening, that does present a big challenge. And so that's why a platform like this where we can speak with all of you, to me, is so helpful, because any person at all tangentially, you know, supporting or helping a youth in foster care, if they can kind of a little bit just understand some of the school stability assurances that are in place for these youth, even if someone else in the process drops the ball, you know, now you from this training can now say, oh, no, this kid's in foster care. Are they staying in the school of origin? Was there a best interest determination? Things like that to help the process and just help provide some safeguards. And so I'll stop there and let other people talk, but I'll throw my email in the chat as well. And definitely, again, you know, this isn't the moment for like individual case management stuff, but if you have a youth in foster care or supporting one and there's any kind of problem with school, definitely email me and just give me a couple days to get back to you. And then I will hopefully be able to help connect you to the right people to help fix you. So go ahead and go to the next person, Amanda.
Thank you, guys. Sorry to rush you at the end. Ashley, any final thoughts? Anything else you want to share about foster ed's work?
Yeah, so we are excited to present at any of your organizations or programs or schools, whatever that looks like. We do offer trainings. We do all kinds of trainings. So if that's something that any of you are interested in, we are happy to do that. Jenny and I are a package deal, so you can reach out to either one of us and we will be more than happy to do that. We also have an education foster care toolkit that is about 96 pages of just all things education foster care related. So if you're maybe new to this and want to learn more, that would be a great resource to kind of read through and to use as a just like a toolkit, pretty much what it is. And yeah, so we're definitely are transitioning to work on more systems level work. And so if you are looking at maybe how you can improve your practices and your policies to be more supportive for youth in foster care, that's something we can definitely help with. And then I'll pass it to Jenny to also share.
Thanks. I think Ashley did a great job. I don't think I have anything else to share. I just want to leave space for questions. But I think Ashley and I can share our contact information in the chat, or Amanda can. And yeah, I'll just stop there.
Thank you, guys. I'm sorry. We all have so much to say, and we always end up in a mad rush at the end. I do want to quickly go to some of the questions in the chat to make sure we are addressing what we can in the last few minutes we have available. So one of the questions from Brandon was, we talked about response to intervention and multi-tiered levels of support, disrupting or pushing back the process. Are there other examples of pushback you've seen schools do to resist these policies that we should look out for? Does anybody on the panel want to jump in and provide a couple examples quickly and things that the audience should look out for from schools? Okay, I will say something. Oh no, go ahead, Jenny. Go.
No, I was just going to say some red flags that we always look out for are schools calling to pick up children early without documentation of a suspension, especially if a child has a disability. Also, when it comes to students that have disabilities and have IEPs, we want to make sure that those IEPs are being implemented. We want to make sure that if evaluations have already been requested, but those evaluations have not been finished, then that student is protected by IDEA law, even if the evaluations have not been completed yet. So make sure that the schools are still following those laws and policies and protecting those students. And then also just making sure that you are not hearing from schools that they are not willing to do an evaluation because they want to first complete those levels of MTSS. And they want to see if those interventions will work first. You can absolutely say that sounds great. I would love for you all to implement that while also evaluating. They can happen simultaneously, and that would be wonderful. So we also watch out for those things as well.
Thanks so much for jumping in on that, Jenny. So some of the other questions are specific, I think, to DCS probably. So Czarina, I don't know if you wanted to speak at all about, let's see, the employer who's looking to connect youth aging out of foster care for, it sounds like, employment and career opportunity afterwards. And then there was also a question about extending foster care services, especially around housing. So if you have any resources or contacts you could share on that.
Yes. So if you can email me those two questions, I think it was Brandon and Derek. I don't have the specific answer on hand, but I can absolutely put you in contact with the right person with our agency that could give you much more information. I do know that we do have a lot of services to support our youth that are transitioning or being in extended foster care. We do have a lot. There's just not enough time in the next couple minutes to explain what services we have for those youth, as well as, including those stakeholders that you mentioned, like access and our REBAs. So we definitely have a lot there. I'm not the expert in that, but again, there's not enough time for it. So just definitely email me and I'll put you in contact with the right person that can give you that information. And in regards to our statistics, there's actually a ton of information on our website that we post, like what Amanda said in the beginning of the presentation, there was some data there. If you go to our website, azdcs.gov, and then you go into our news and reports tab, there is a significant amount of information from, our demographics to where all of our kids are placed to child fatalities. There's so much information there. I would definitely guide you there to look at that. But you also touch on something that another hat that I wear is the crossover youth. So those are our youth that are delinquent and dependent. So there are youth that are experiencing, they're in juvenile probation, but they're also in the foster care system. And I'd be happy to talk to you about that and all the wonderful work that we do in our crossover youth cases, and what we're trying to do to try to support our youth, not further penetrate the juvenile justice system or the child welfare system. So there's a lot that I do with juvenile probation as well, that I'd be happy to talk to you about. And then that was Lynette's question in regards to that piece of it. And then I did put my email in the chat so that that is the best way to reach me. If you have any further questions, I'm happy to connect with you via email.
Thank you so much. I just want to say quickly, thank you to all the panelists for your time. I know that you guys are all so busy and are doing so much good work in the community. So thank you for taking time out of your morning to be here and present at the African American Conference on Disabilities. I'm going to hand it back over to Natalie to wrap up.
Okay, thank you so much for everybody's attention. This was a great presentation. I know there was a lot more questions. This probably could go for another hour. So thank you so much to our panelists, Czarina, Joey, Ashley, Jenny, and of course, my colleague Amanda. I have put in the chat the link to the survey. Please fill out our survey because then you can also get a certificate of attendance. Our last session today is at 1 o'clock Arizona time, and that will be with Dr. Dawson, tracing the trauma thread from our ancestors to present healing. So I'm really hoping to see you then. I put our sponsors in the chat to thank them since we are at time. And please, if you can still donate, and we still are taking donations for our June conference, and I will also put that in the chat as well. It is through the Eventbrite, and if you go there, you'll see, it'll take you to the tickets, but you'll see a button for donations. So if you can do that, we'd really appreciate that as well. And if there's anything else, I will bid you all adieu and hope to see you at 1 o'clock today. Thank you.